So, the U.S. Congress, it was basically born out of a huge fight between the big states and the small states. Its entire design, its very DNA, is meant to force people to compromise. But what happens when that design gets exploited? When the art of politics turns into something more like, well, modern warfare? I know, it sounds like a riddle, right? But it's a central, nagging question in American politics. Can the lines on a map, just simple lines, actually have more power than thousands and thousands of votes? To get how that's even possible, we need to rewind a bit and look at why this whole map and the body it represents was created in the first place.
Okay, so the story really kicks off with the creation of the legislative branch itself. Now, the framers of the Constitution didn't just create one single Congress. Nope, they very deliberately split it in two. And this division wasn't some accident. It was a super carefully negotiated solution to their very first major crisis.
And this setup has a fancy name, a bicameral legislature. This whole idea, born out of what we call the Great Compromise of 1787, was meant to create a check within the legislative branch itself. The thinking was, for any law to actually pass, two very different groups of people with very different interests have to agree on it.
So here was the core problem. You had big states, like Virginia, arguing that, hey, we have more people, so we should have more power. Makes sense, right? But then you had the small states, like Delaware, terrified of being completely steamrolled. So the compromise gave both sides a win. You get a House of Representatives, where representation is based on population, and you get a Senate, where every single state, no matter how big or small, gets exactly 2 votes.
And what's fascinating is that this compromise didn't just create 2 buildings on Capitol Hill. It created 2 totally different cultures, with completely different ways of making laws. These differences are absolutely intentional, and they are fundamental to how Washington works, or doesn't work sometimes.
So, in the House of Representatives, you've got 435 members. Each one of them represents a specific, geographically drawn congressional district. Their job is pretty clear. Be the voice for the folks in that one little slice of the country.
And then you jump over to the Senate, and there are just 100 members. See, each senator doesn't just represent a district, they represent their entire state. A senator from California speaks for almost 40 million people, while a senator from Wyoming speaks for just under 600,000. And yet they each get one single vote. These differences create totally different incentives. Think about it. House members, with their 2-year terms, are basically in a constant state of campaigning. It keeps them really close to what their voters want right now. Senators, on the other hand, they get 6-year terms, which gives them a bit more breathing room to focus on longer-term, national issues. And their special powers create a balance too. The House holds the purse strings, controlling federal spending, while the Senate gets to confirm presidential appointments and approve treaties.
All right, now let's zoom in on the House of Representatives, because this is where that map we talked about becomes everything. Every 10 years, right after the national census, all 435 of these district lines have to be redrawn. And that process, drawing those lines, has become one of the fiercest political battlegrounds in America.
This practice is called gerrymandering. And honestly, it's kind of the art of drawing political maps not to create fair representation, but to give one political party a massive, built-in advantage. It's about choosing your voters before they ever get a chance to choose you.
So one of the main weapons in the playbook is packing. This is where you basically take all your opponent's voters and cram them into as few districts as possible. Yeah, they'll win those districts in a landslide, but all those extra votes are essentially wasted because they have zero influence in any of the neighboring districts.
And the flip side of that coin is cracking. Here, you do the opposite. You take a big group of your opponent's voters and you slice them up, spreading them so thinly across a bunch of different districts that they can't form a majority anywhere. Their voting power just gets totally diluted.
Okay, look at this. This shows you just how powerful these techniques are. In a so-called fair map scenario, Party A has 60% of the voters, so they naturally win all 5 seats. Makes sense. But now, look over at the Jerry for B map. With the exact same voters, just by redrawing the lines, the majority Party A now wins only 1 seat, while the minority Party B walks away with 4.
So this really gets to the heart of it, right? How on earth is it possible for a party that lost the popular vote by 20 points to walk away with 80% of the political power? The answer is shockingly simple. They used packing and cracking to guarantee that outcome. The map, not the voters, decided that election.
Well, as you can imagine, this whole practice got so out of hand that eventually the judicial branch had to step in. The Supreme Court was asked to basically be a referee and figure out when this political gamesmanship crosses a constitutional line.
One of the first huge cases was Baker v. Carr back in 1962, and the situation was pretty wild. Tennessee hadn't redrawn its legislative maps since 1901. That's 61 years. In that time, tons of people had moved into cities, but all the political power was still stuck in the rural areas with way fewer people. A city person's vote was worth just a fraction of a rural voter's.
And the Supreme Court's decision here was a bombshell. It established this revolutionary principle: one person, one vote. This was huge. For the first time, it gave federal courts the power to rule on redistricting, basically saying that districts have to have roughly equal populations so that every citizen's vote carries roughly equal weight.
But, population wasn't the only problem. Fast forward to 1993, and you get Shaw v. Reno. This case was about a district in North Carolina that was just bizarre. It was drawn specifically to elect a black representative, and it snaked for 160 miles along an interstate highway. In some spots, it was literally no wider than the road itself. It raised a whole new constitutional question.
Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing for the majority, argued that even if you have good intentions, making race the #1 dominant factor in drawing a district is constitutionally suspicious. The worry was that it risks balkanizing citizens, separating them into these competing racial groups, which undermines the whole idea that an elected official is supposed to represent everyone in their district, not just one demographic.
So the big ruling was this: race can be a factor when you're drawing districts, but it can't be the predominant factor. It can't be the main reason. In any map where race is the primary driver, has to pass something called strict scrutiny, which is a really, really high legal bar to clear.
Okay, so let's pull back for a second. Where does all of this leave us? We've got a system designed for compromise and debate, but we've also seen how the simple lines on a map can be twisted to manipulate that very system. Let's do a quick recap.
All right, so the big takeaways. Number 1, the two-chamber system is a deliberate compromise to balance the power between big states and small states. 2, the process of drawing House districts, gerrymandering, can be used to rig elections before a single vote is even cast. And 3, the Supreme Court has stepped in to create some guardrails, demanding that districts have equal populations and putting limits on using race as the main reason for drawing a line. And that brings us right back to our final big question. The entire American system is built on this idea of representation. But if the lines on a map can predetermine who wins an election, it forces us to ask a much, much deeper question about our democracy. What truly makes a vote powerful?